Hello friends. So in this painting I'm currently doing the first wash to paint these skies with cerulean blue and ultramarine blue. A few touches where it is wet on wet, where I'm giving enough time for the pigment to spread on the surface. My surface is inclined around 45 degrees, so gravity plays a role to let the pigment flow across the surface. You might have noticed that I am taking off the extra pigment before hitting the brush on the surface. I have a dry cloth next to me, so I'm using that to take off the extra pigment off. I'm using the tip of the brush here to touch the pigment and leave the white space of the paper to give an sky effect where we have some of the dark clouds, some of the lighter bluish clouds, and also taking off the pigment from the surface with the dry brush. So it was damp. I have extracted the water from it. It is damp, so it is easy to take off the pigment while it is wet. It is the first wash now for the background with the green background. It gives an emphasis of or impression of the trees behind this in the scene. I mean, it's way back in the scene. I'm adding a little bit ochre yellow, and some of the brown mixed in the yellow ochre. It's burnt sienna and burnt umber that I'm using from Winsor & Newton. It is to gradually paint the background and foreground. So ideally, the things which are at far, they are lighter in the color values than the things which are closer. So that's how it's going to be. I'm going to take some of the green hue and mix it, leave some of the white spaces for cows which are going to be there in the foreground. So I'm using now burnt umber from Winsor & Newton. I'm going to give a little bit darker values there, so you can feel a three-dimensional effect on the two-dimensional paper. So this is just an illusion to create how do you mix colors to bring in shadows, values, the different colors that you're going to mix. Now it is the time to do a little bit give an impression of the background trees in your scene, in your landscape. So a little darker value of green and removing the hard edges, giving them the soft edges, mixing the color again, and giving the impression of the trees at the far side. You can use the dry brush stroke to give an impression of the trees at the far. So it looks kind of realistic. So it is not very easy to get used to all these what's a dry brush strokes. So you need to practice it a lot. Now using the yellow ochre, it's a second wash on the background. On the landscape you can see a big huge ground has been confined into this A4 or A5 size paper, and you want to mix the colors in a way that it seems like that okay, it looks like sort of a landscape painting that is kind of realistic. So using green shades along with the yellow ochre, somewhat burnt umber, carefully touching the ground and just making sure that the focal point that I have in the painting is related to or is around the pathway on the ground that is taking your eyes from the foreground to background, and then your eyes would move around the other second or third focal points in your painting. So primary focal point has been the path and then the other components. Just taking time to mix the colors, and it is now when I'm doing the wet on wet, so that's why I have used the water first, and then I'm using color so that it gets spread evenly on the paper. Carefully painting the land around that figure, around cows, and also making sure that okay, the pathway that I have is sort of visible through the grass, through the trees that's going to come soon in this painting. So just trying to make sure that I'm using the color carefully. I'm not giving too much attention to the how grass is going to look like or how a tree is going to look like at first, but I'm just making sure that okay, colors are mixed properly, and the pigment in the foreground is darker than the pigment on the background. So just giving some few highlights over there with darker green values. it is important to take the extra water off your brush while you are painting. Otherwise, you would accidentally ruin the painting or the areas where you don't want extra water. Foreground is important where you might want to show some of the water patterns on the top of the color. So that's why I've sprayed out a little bit of water, sprinkled it with the tip of the brush. It's going to dry out soon, so you won't even notice, but it will leave a visible mark of what's a grass and some sort of random flowers on the foreground. Now I'm going back. Meanwhile, the foreground is getting dry. I'm going back and making the trees more prominent with a little darker values. It's grayish green, where you can say it's a mix of green, gray, a little bit ochre, and burnt sienna. So carefully taking and giving this shape sort of once you look at the landscape, your trees are overall shape is either round or vertical. So with the with the angle, the way which you look at the painting, or you would look at the landscape, you would notice that trees are formed in a particular shape. So look for the bigger shape first and then get into the details. So first try to cover up the big shapes, give them some dark values over there, just to denote the shadow underneath the tree. I'm not hurrying up at this time. I'm just taking my own time to paint these trees and giving some values, reasonable values, adding more pigments wherever it is required. So it would make a clear difference between background and foreground trees. Now you can see the foreground trees coming up now, and you can see the perspective is building up slowly. We'll see some of the darker valued trees around that pathway, and as your eyes roll through this painting, goes through this painting from foreground to background, you can see different sizes of those trees, different values of those trees, and now your first wash of the background trees would make sense. So adding a little bit few more impression of trees, grass around that pathway with the dry brush stroke. I'm not hurrying up in painting those, but a few touches of a brush a little bit around that pathway, giving a impression that okay, there is a vertical tree over there. So when your eyes would notice that okay, yeah, this is the path and it going somewhere down there back of your landscape. So it would give you a perspective around the 3D sort of picture in front of you. adding really darker values around the hut to pop up the hut and the tree behind it. Some of the random grass, there is a pile of what is a mud over there, where I'm painting some of the green grass or bush kind of structure, a grass or a mud on the sideways of this path. Now it's a time to give a little bit of impression of long grass, let's say, with the help of dry brush strokes. So I'm using Bristol brush, and it is very good in terms of let's say holding the water and doing the brush strokes. So this is number 2 of round Bristol brush. It's a natural hair brush, so it holds the water for very long. It's hold the pigment for very long, and if you squeeze the tip of the brush, the excess water will go away and it will take a shape like a blade. So you can use that blade at times, like I'm doing right now, to give an impression of that pathway on the sides behind these cows. It is important to take off the excess water, the excess color that you don't want accidentally to put on your painting at first. So just make sure that you wipe off your brush at times. That's why we call a dry brush stroke as a dry brush stroke, because it is not having enough water in it. It is sort of dry, but it is still holds some of the pigments in it. So as you quickly move your hand from left to right, or run through the paper, it will leave some of the white spaces, some of these spaces, while let's say color is still there. So that helps in giving an impression that okay, there is some grass or there is some mud on the ground, but it's not fully color loaded with the color. Few touch points in the background to make sense that okay, over when in terms of landscape, the perspective changes when you move from foreground to background. Your bigger shapes go smaller in size. Now we are trying to paint the hut. So while painting the hut, just trying to remember the sunlight, the source of light, and where the shadows should be. So I'm painting the darker values just to just by thinking and imagining that my source of light is up. So the shadows that you see on the hut are from top to down and left to right. So you're gonna see what's the shadow of the tree as well there on the roof of the hut. Generally, shadows are with the lighter values. It depends on what sort of color you have for the roof. So if it is white, then your shadow would be little darker than white, that is gray. If your what's a roof has got some color, then accordingly it's gonna have the shadow of that color varied in the values. Now I'm gonna paint the cows there in that landscape. So generally, I mean, there is no such rule or there's no a defined way how do you paint cows, but ideally in the what's say landscape, when you paint a shape, okay, it comes with a perspective. So closer to your eyes would be bigger shape, and the further that you go in the landscape, it will get smaller and the lighter values. So just painting the cow with some Payne's gray color, taking some time to do a very little minute details with some black and white patches on their skin. I'm not getting into details about when you paint this kind of landscape and the figures are itself very small, you don't have to worry about their further details like eyes and ears and also all sort of this. Just pay attention to their the shape. The bigger shapes, they give a what's an impression that what you are painting and what subject is there in your painting. Adding a shadow will anchor your subject to the ground, and you might have noticed the shadow on the grass is green, or sort of a value which is as per the surrounding color. So if the grass is green, then shadow would be around that color but of different value. Whereas the shadow on the roof, if it is roof is white, then your shadow would be grayish. So you need to learn, you get used to observe these things when you regularly paint the subject. Shadows are not black. Shadows are not a particular color. So you need to figure out that what shadows would be. Okay. In this landscape, I'm just touching and finding out the slots there. If you're let's say, focal point changes, then where your eyes will, let's say, go from the center of focal point to the background or the other corners of the painting. So my eye first lands on the center of the painting, where you see a triangle sort of path, where paths are crossing, which is behind the cow. Then your eyes move to a back side of the painting background, and then it comes back around the hut, and then on the left side. So in case you don't want to miss out, in case you want to keep the audience engaged while they are looking at your painting, you need to decide what is the focal point. If there are multiple focal points in your painting, then accordingly you need to emphasize. You might have noticed that I'm not emphasizing the upper left side of the painting, because that's not my focal point. My focal point has been at the center, at the intersection of the path, the cow, the hut, and the trees behind that. And then your eyes would go all the way from there to left, and will cover the what's a canvas. In this case, it is paper. So I'm just picking some of the Chinese white from the tip of the tube. I'm just painting the some flowers during the summer that pops up, that they pop up due to hot sun is directly coming on there. So it is just to highlight some of the details in the foreground, and I'm not worrying about the background at this point. Some dry brush mark around the cows, just to highlight the grass sort of impression over there with the tip of my round brush. It's as I mentioned, that's a Bristol brush, and it is quite a handy brush. It's number 2. So just giving an impression of grass around this area of the field. I don't have to paint every thread of the grass. Just a little bit impression would suffice. Pretty much done with the painting. Just thinking, you should know when to stop, and when you have covered all your subjects. A little bit touch points around the hut, just to show that light is reflecting either out of the window, or something is lying there and light is somewhat reflecting from there. So it gives an impression that it's not just a hut, and there are some objects around it. A little darker values for the shade, so that it gives a 3D sort of impression that okay, that object has light is let's say hitting the surface, but where the light is not hitting it forms a shadow, so it gives an impression of 3D, adding minute details that adds what's a value to your painting. I think I'm pretty much done with the painting, and now it is time to reveal the clean hard edges by peeling the masking tape. So when you peel the masking tape, it gives a very nice impression that okay, around the boundaries you are looking into a painting, and there are clean edges over there. It brings a frame sort of impression on your painting. It is time to give some of the minor details like flying birds around that lens in that sky, and adding some animals, birds in your landscape. It gives a life to your painting. So it is important how you and what details do you choose. Okay, what sort of values you are adding. So you might have seen that okay, as I mentioned earlier, I am picking and choosing the center and the right side of the painting as a focal point. So when your eyes move around in that painting, it always go in there to catch your attention every time. Okay, so a few more birds there, and I think after that I should be done with the painting because I have covered most of the objects in there. It is time to sign it. So I generally sign with my full name, and I also recently have started stamping the artwork on its back for authenticity and for originality of the painting, so that buyers, they don't have any confusion about whether it is original painting or the exclusive painting or not. So I would say thank you so much for giving your time and watching the whole video. If you have learned any bit of it, give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It will help in making such detailed videos, lengthy videos, and giving a commentary around it. Hope it's been helpful, and don't forget to subscribe the channel. I'm also at the Instagram. My details are there in the description below. So talk to you soon with another painting. Thank you so much. Keep on painting. Cheers. Bye.